What is up, guys, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time coming through here, thank you. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. It makes my heart feel warm and fuzzy that you would take the time to watch my videos about my random mess. So thank you for sticking around. Today we're going to talk about something that I have been very passionate about recently, and that's Pokemon trading card game. And my brother has this Roaring Moon EX build that we've been working on for a little bit, and honestly it is super consistent. It's really hard. It's got some flaws, I'm not going to lie. We'll get into those later, but we're going to get into the deck profile, and then I'll kind of show you how it works and the key players in the deck. So here we go. So in this deck, we are running one Fezandipiti, one Lumineon, two Pecharunt, a Radiant Greninja, a Roaring Moon regular, a Roaring Moon EX at 4, and Rotom. I know a lot of people tend to run a Squawk ability for this, but I found in my playtesting that even though it was really consistent to get him in your hand, oftentimes he was dead in the late game and served no purpose beyond allowing you to get cards in your graveyard, which, as the game goes on, just becomes less and less prevalent. You really want your cards in hand that are going to grave to be what you want in the grave and not a vitality, and it always came down to getting rid of my vitalities for it to really work. So I ended up cutting it, putting in Lumineon and Rotom V and the 4 Sealed Stone for guaranteed searches over draws, and Rotom is there to kind of help your first turn be a little bit more consistent if you end up going first, because this is a going second deck. Sometimes you will go first, and Rotom kind of helps get your hand together for when it's time to start doing some damage. And honestly, the trainers are pretty standard. 1 Boss's Orders, 4 Dark Patch, 4 Earthen Vessel, 1 for Sealed Stone, 2 Iono, 4 Nest Ball, 1 Night Stretcher, 1 Pal Pad, 4 PokéStop, 2 Pokégear, 4 Pokémon Catcher, 1 Prime Catcher, 4 Sada's Vitality, 4 Trekking Shoes, and 3 Ultra Balls. I was running 2 Judges at first, and then I switched to 2 Iono, and then I switched back to 2 Judges. Honestly, it's your discretion, whichever one you want to use. Iono has utility. It's a good disruption when you need it to be. Sometimes the prize card trade-off is a little bit awkward, and Iono can kind of help you maintain control of the match if the opponent is going to slow it down, because this deck wants to take prize cards as quickly as it can. This isn't a like Charizard, for instance. You put Charizard out against anything, Charizard just wants to fight, dude. He just wants to get out in the ring. He wants to go crazy. He wants to go bananas. That's not what this deck wants to do. It has a very specific goal in mind, and that is to use Frenzied Gouging to take out any Pokemon card that would allow you to have 2 prize cards. Sometimes your opponent can get wise to this, or they may just know how the deck plays, and they can make your prize trade-off really awkward by making you take 1 card instead of 2. That might not seem like a big deal to you until you start to realize that what you could have won in 3 turns, you now have to win in 4 because of an awkward prize trade-off. There is a way to make this work in your favor, but the idea is to use Frenzied Gouging to take out all of their V and EX Pokemon and V-Star Pokemon as quickly as possible. I also run 9 Darkness Energy. That's pretty standard in here. But again, if Charizard is like the Barbarian deck, right, it just goes crazy, then this is like the Sniper deck. You have specific targets you want to hit. You want to drop tactical nukes on them as much as you possibly can to try to win as early as you can. We're going to go over the key players of this deck, how it works, how some of the combos work, and how you can pull off some of the nutty shenanigans this deck can do, because God knows it's got it, and we're going to get right into that in the next little bit. So we're going to get right into explaining what the key players are first. So your 4 key cards are going to be Roaring Moon EX, Roaring Moon, Pecharunt, and Radiant Greninja. First, let's look at the Pokemon that's going to be doing the bulk of the knockouts, Roaring Moon EX. Roaring Moon EX is a 230 health Dark-type Pokemon with a 2 colorless retreat cost and 2 attacks that require you to have 6 energies committed to him before you're able to use his attacks. While Calamity Storm can help break up weird prize trade-offs, the main attack we're going to be using is Frenzied Gouging. And that attack reads, knock out your opponent's active Pokemon. If your opponent's active Pokemon is knocked out in this way, this Pokemon does 200 damage to itself. Now when you're reading that attack, you might see the 200 damage to itself with only 230 HP and think, how is that really going to advance the game state? How is that really beneficial to me at all? But in order to understand how that is important, you first need to understand the objective of the deck. Like I said in the intro to this video, Roaring Moon is not a deck that wants to fight Pokemon. Roaring Moon is a deck that wants to take prize cards. So what's the difference, right? What does that really matter? The difference is that Frenzied Gouging doesn't actually deal any damage to any Pokemon, it just knocks them out. It deals damage to you, doesn't deal damage to them. And it's important to use that attack against any Pokemon that would be a V Pokemon or EX Pokemon or V-Star Pokemon even, because those give out 2 prize cards. The object of Roaring Moon is to win in as few turns as possible by sending your energies to the graveyard using a plethora of effects we'll go over later, and using Sada's Vitality and Dark Patch to build up your Roaring Moon EX to use Frenzied Gouging on their more powerful Pokemon, their key players, their V Pokemon most of the time, or an EX Pokemon. But we'll talk more about the theory crafting about how that works here in just a second. Let's look at the other key players first. Let's look at Pecharunt EX. Pecharunt EX is a 190 health Dark type Pokemon with an ability and 1 attack that sometimes actually comes in handy, believe it or not, and a 1 colorless retreat cost. But first, the most important part, his ability. So let's read that real quick. Once during your turn, you may switch out one of your benched Dark Pokemon, except any Pecharunt EX with your active Pokemon. If you do, the new active Pokemon is now poisoned. You can't use more than 1 Subjugated Chains ability each turn. Reading the full text of that card is very important. Once during your turn, you may switch one of your benched Dark Pokemon, except Pecharunt EX. So the way it reads kind of sounds like you can't switch out if he is the active, but you can't switch the active out with him, is the way that it's reading. The nature of this card makes boss's orders basically negligible. It doesn't even really matter unless they're going to boss's orders to destroy something. Boss's orders, capture catcher, all that stuff is not really a disruption for you. It also allows for free retreats and free switches when you really need them, and sometimes you really need to get your switches going. Lastly, let's look at the attack of Pecharunt, because sometimes you will need to fight with him. Irritated Outburst. This attack does 60 damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. Essentially, he's a baby Charizard. He does the exact same thing. The only difference is that he doesn't have the base 180 damage that Charizard does on top of the 30 damage that Charizard does for every prize card you've taken. He'll do less damage, but it can be good to help break up boards when you're in a bad prize trade-off. Now let's look at our third most important card, Radiant Greninja, because the deck isn't as fast without him. Radiant Greninja is a 130 health water-type Pokemon that has an attack that you'll never use. You only have him in the deck for his ability. Let's go over that real quick. Concealed cards. You must discard an energy card from your hand in order to use this ability. Once during your turn, you may draw 2 cards. You see, because the thing is, dropping tactical nukes on your opponent's V-Stars, and EXs aren't cheap, and there's no way to possibly do it by just attaching them from hand as quickly as you want it to get done. So what you do is you use your Earthen Vessels to pull your energies to hand, or use Radiant Greninja to toss your energy to the graveyard in order to use Vitality to draw 2 cards to add energies to your Pokemon. Use your Dark Patches to attach them from the graveyard to your Pokemon. That is the object of this game. Getting the energies in the graveyard as quickly as possible is step 1 of making this work, and Greninja is a linchpin to making that happen. And I mean, in a card game, drawing cards, I hear that's pretty good. Drawing 2 cards, sure, why not? That's fun. Sometimes in a card game, you brick, and you need those 2 cards. Sometimes 2 cards is all you need to win the game. Lastly, let's look at our final key player, Little Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon is a 140 health dark type Pokemon with 2 attacks and a 2 colorless energy retreat cost. His 2 attacks, one takes 2 energy and the other one takes 4 energy, but it is his role in the deck that makes him important. So let's look at the only attack you'll probably ever actually use, which is Vengeance Fletching. This attack does 10 more damage for each ancient card in your discard pile. 10 plus damage sounds negligible, but when you realize how many of those cards you're funneling through to get your energies into the graveyard, trust me, it adds up really, really quick. Anywhere between 130 damage to 150 damage will take out most basic Pokemon that are a problem, like Snorlax for instance. And anywhere between 180 to 220 will take out most normal V Pokemon. Sometimes even an EX if you're really lucky. But it is his role in the deck that makes him important. So let's go over that real quick, very quickly. The only way to really understand this is to have a bit of a thought experiment. So let's go on a journey together, okay? Let's say for our little thought experiment, they managed to get rid of one of your Roaring Moon EXs before you're really set up to do any kind of real damage with both of them at the same time. Because ideally you want to have 2 of them that have 6 energies apiece. And now you're in a position where you have to have something to break up that prize trade-off in order to make it awkward for them to win in 2 turns for you, since most of your Pokemon are either Vs or EXs. But that trade-off also applies to your opponent, where he will now have to destroy the regular Roaring Moon to take 1 prize card, essentially buying yourself more time. That is the entire purpose of Roaring Moon, keeping the prize trade-off in your favor. With the Pokemon out of the way, we're now going to go quickly into the trainer cards that are a part of your combo. Almost all of them do the same thing, but they're all just as important. Those cards being Earthen Vessel, Professor Sada's Vitality, Dark Patch, and PokéStop. All 4 of these cards are discard pile reliant or involve getting cards to your hand that you will then ditch to the grave in order to use their effects properly. Dark Patch allows you to add 1 dark energy to any one of your dark benched Pokemon. Professor Sada's Vitality does essentially the same thing. The only difference is that you have to target ancient Pokemon. You can do up to 2. They can be active or in the bench, and if you do attach at least 1 to one Pokemon, you draw 2 cards. Earthen Vessel allows you to ditch a card to the discard pile in order to grab 2 energies from your deck. Used optimally, you'll toss an energy to grab 2 energies. And then PokéStop, it's really to just get cards in your grave, but you can also use it to grab Dark Patches, Nest Balls, Ultra Balls, Pokemon Catchers, your Prime Catcher, pretty much anything in your deck, because you only run a handful of supporter cards. So the card has a double utility of not only getting draw cards to your hand or combo pieces to your hand, but it also allows you to get energies into the grave. Leaving the last few supporters that you have, the Pokégear, the Night Stretcher, the Pal Pad, the Ultra Balls, the Nest Balls, to be completely situational to whatever you need. I tend to pull the Roaring Moons with the Nest Ball. I'll pull Lumineon with the Ultra Ball to get it to hand, or the Rotom if you really need it to start with. Ultra Ball is a very versatile card. You can pick pretty much anything you want. The Pokemon Catchers and the Prime Catchers are sole disruption. Their only real job is to disrupt your opponent. Same with like your Boss's Orders. They do essentially the same thing as Boss's Orders. All your disruption cards should be used to pull Vs, V-Stars, and EXs to active to knock them out in an ideal situation, but you can also use them to put your opponent in a bad game state to where they have to ditch energies to retreat or something of that nature. We'll talk lastly about my tech for this deck, which is the Forest Sealed Stone. It does essentially the same thing it does in the Charizard build if you play it. It's just a card that allows you to search for anything you may need. You never know when 1 Dark Patch or 1 Vitality will be the difference between winning or losing the game. You could pull an energy for Greninja if you really needed to. The card's just too good to not splash into this deck in my opinion. And it works so well with Lumineon that I didn't see a reason to not include it. Now we're going to very quickly go over the theory crafting of the way that I have this deck teched out for me and why I like to play it the way I play it and my mindset behind how I play it. In Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a deck called Lightsworns, and they do essentially the same thing. You're milling cards to the graveyard in order to get your Lightsworns engraved. And the theory crafting behind a Light Sworn deck and this deck are fairly similar, honestly. You want to get your energies in the grave to make your Dark Patches active, to make your Vitality active, to get your draws going, to get your attacks going, to be set up to do big board damage by turn 2 no later than turn 3. You want at least one EX Roaring Moon to be ready to go by turn 3 no later than that. We've talked about all the things that I like about this deck, so I'm going to go over very quickly the things that are a little bit difficult to get over. As I've said many times throughout this video, prize card trade-offs are very, very important, and sometimes you're not able to take the 2 prize cards you need, you have to take the 1. And if that ends up becoming a thing, you need to know the deck you're playing against. If you're ever put in a situation where you have to actually fight Pokemon, instead of using Frenzied Gouging to get your prizes, you need to know how the opponent's deck works. It does require knowing the bare minimums of what their combo pieces are, how the deck is going to interact with you, and how they plan to advance their game state. Because if they're going to force you to sit on a Charmeleon, for instance, then you know it's going to be a Charizard deck. Do they have a Charmander on board? Do you know if they have a rare candy? Is it important that Charmeleon was the one they put into the active? These are all things that you need to be thinking about as you're playing a more passive game instead of one that's so aggressive. In that situation, I would recommend stop drawing, stop searching. As long as you have at least 2 Roaring Moons ready to fight, don't worry so much about it. Save the 1 Roaring Moon for the Charizard you know is inevitable, and then use your other Roaring Moon to fight the Little Mons. Most people see this deck and they think that disrupting your prizes is going to be the way to win. So you need to keep that in mind when playing Roaring Moon, and always have a way to break up their prizes in case they do try to make it to where they're getting additional turns by sending out Little Mons instead of sending out EXs, Vs, or V-Stars. All in all, I love the deck. I think that it is probably one of the most consistent Pokemon decks I've ever played in terms of the sheer ability to get its objective on board as quickly as possible. I have run Charizard builds, many Charizard builds, but every single one of them have a consistency issue. It's either you can't get your Charizards in hand, you can't get your rare candies in hand, you're not drawing into your Arvents, something. It's always something that you have to fight through. But this deck always gets the job done. It's always getting energies in the graveyard. I've never been out of a way to draw. I've never been unable to commit energies to board. I've always been able to get at least 1 Roaring Moon ready to go by my 2nd turn, if not my 3rd turn. Most of the time by my 3rd turn, I have 2 ready to go, ready to win the game. The deck, in my opinion, has an immense amount of potential, and I know it has seen tournament wins in the past. I haven't seen it on anybody's top 10 list because I feel like they think the price trade-off is enough to make you lose, but I think that in the hands of the right trainer, it could really be a top contender, and an even bigger top contender, something that could actually be considered meta in the future, assuming that the letter doesn't drop off. So thank you again for coming to my TED Talk. I really appreciate you guys coming here to check this out. I personally love playing the trading card game. I've always been a trading card game fan. I will continue to play Pokemon. If you want to, you can add me. Michael021. I'll put it on screen. Is my name. You can add me. We can play some games together. We can stream it together if you want. I love playing the game. I love building decks. It's so much easier to do in Pokemon and so much more original in Pokemon than it is in Yu-Gi-Oh! So I've really been enjoying my time playing this. I do plan on playing at some live locals here pretty soon, so I'll let y'all know how that goes in the future. But thank you for checking out my channel. Leave a like and subscribe. Thank you for coming out and listening, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.